The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the conference room. I sat at the head of the long table, my fingers tracing the edge of a leather-bound notebook that had once belonged to my father. It was ironic, really, me being here, in this exact seat where they told me just 2 months ago that budget cuts were forcing them to let me go. The words still echoed in my mind like some cruel punchline, budget cuts. As if I were nothing more than an expendable line item on their spreadsheet. My name is Adrian Vega, and this is how it all began, or rather, how it all changed forever. I remember walking into work that morning with the kind of energy you can only summon when you've been up since dawn preparing for a big presentation. My heels clicked against the polished marble floors as I made my way through the lobby of Sterling & Company, one of the most prestigious marketing firms in the city. Everyone knew what happened inside those glass walls could make or break careers, brands, even lives. And I had spent the last 8 years building mine from scratch within those very walls. 8 years of late nights, missed birthdays, cancelled vacations, all for the dream of making something meaningful out of the chaos. But none of that mattered anymore. By noon, I was sitting across from Greg, the smug, perpetually tan CEO who always smelled faintly of cologne and entitlement, and his HR lackey Cheryl. Her face was unreadable behind her oversized glasses, but her hands trembled slightly as she slid a folder toward me. Inside were papers detailing my termination, neatly typed and stamped with corporate jargon about restructuring efforts and financial prudence. Greg leaned back in his chair, his expensive watch glinting under the light. "Adrian," he said, pausing dramatically as though delivering bad news required theatrical flair, "you've done great work here. But these are tough times, and we need to make difficult decisions." Difficult decisions. Right. Because firing someone who'd poured her soul into the company wasn't personal, it was business. Except it wasn't. Not entirely. And deep down, I think Greg knew it too. He wouldn't meet my eyes as he spoke, choosing instead to stare somewhere above my shoulder like I was already invisible. They escorted me out before I could fully process what had happened. Security guards, I'd seen them around the office countless times, nodding politely as we passed each other in the hallways, now stood awkwardly by my desk, watching as I packed my things into a cardboard box. Colleagues peeked out from behind their monitors, pretending not to notice while secretly cataloging every detail for later gossip sessions. It felt surreal, like I was living someone else's nightmare. That night, alone in my apartment with takeout Chinese food and reruns of old sitcoms playing in the background, reality finally hit me like a freight train. I cried until my throat hurt and my eyes swelled shut. Then I got angry. Really angry. How dare they dismiss me so callously? After everything I'd given them? After the campaigns I'd led, the clients I'd landed, the awards we'd won together? None of it seemed to matter now. And yet, amidst the anger and betrayal, another emotion began to simmer beneath the surface: determination. They thought they could erase me, sweep me aside like yesterday's trash. But they didn't know me, not really. If there's one thing I learned growing up in a household where resilience was practically a religion, it's that setbacks aren't endings. They're opportunities. Opportunities to prove people wrong, to rise higher than anyone expects, to show the world exactly what you're made of. So I picked myself up. I called my lawyer first thing the next morning. His name was Marcus, and he was known for taking on cases others deemed unwinnable. When I explained what had happened, his voice took on a sharp edge. "This isn't just about budget cuts, Adrian," he said after listening intently. "There's more going on here, and we're going to find out what it is." What followed was weeks of digging, uncovering emails, memos, and internal documents that painted a picture far darker than I'd imagined. It turned out Sterling & Company hadn't fired me because of financial struggles. They were thriving, posting record profits quarter after quarter. No, my termination was part of something much more calculated. A power play orchestrated by Greg himself, aimed at silencing anyone who might challenge his authority or threaten his carefully curated image. And I wasn't the first casualty. Whispers of similar stories surfaced among former employees too scared to speak out. Armed with evidence and fueled by righteous indignation, Marcus filed a lawsuit against the company. The media frenzy that ensued was both exhilarating and exhausting. Headlines screamed about corporate greed and betrayal, painting me as either a victim or a hero depending on which publication you read. Friends reached out offering support, while acquaintances sent messages laced with thinly veiled jealousy. Through it all, I kept my focus laser sharp. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. Justice for myself, yes, but also for every person who'd ever been treated as disposable by those in power. As the trial date approached, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. Growing up in a small town where dreams often stayed buried beneath layers of practicality, I'd always been the odd one out. While classmates talked about settling down and starting families, I dreamed of skyscrapers and boardrooms. My parents, bless their hearts, never quite understood my ambition, but they supported me anyway. "If you want it bad enough, Mija," my mom used to say, "you'll find a way." She was right. I did find a way. From internships that paid peanuts to entry-level jobs that demanded everything, I clawed my way up the ladder one rung at a time. Each step taught me something new, not just about marketing strategies or client relations, but about people. About trust, loyalty, and the fragile nature of both. By the time I landed at Sterling and Company, I thought I'd finally earned my place among the elite. Turns out, earning respect in corporate America isn't quite the same as keeping it. Still, the courtroom battle loomed large, and I couldn't afford to dwell on past lessons. Every day leading up to it was a whirlwind of preparation, strategy sessions with Marcus, and sleepless nights spent rehearsing testimony. Yet despite the pressure, I felt oddly calm. Maybe it was the clarity that comes with purpose, or maybe it was simply knowing that no matter what happened next, I'd already proven one thing to myself: I wasn't afraid to fight. On the morning of the trial, I dressed carefully, choosing a tailored navy suit that screamed confidence without shouting arrogance. As I walked into the courthouse, cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, but I tuned them out, focusing instead on the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about winning or losing, it was about standing tall, about refusing to be diminished by anyone. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. Greg sat stoically beside his team of high-powered attorneys, his expression unreadable. Across the aisle, Marcus gave me a reassuring nod, his presence grounding me. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Hours melted into days as witness after witness took the stand, each piece of evidence chipping away at Sterling and Company's carefully constructed facade. Testimonies revealed patterns of discrimination, favoritism, and outright deceit. Emails showed executives mocking employees behind closed doors, celebrating terminations as victories. Financial records exposed bonuses handed out to top brass while lower-level workers struggled to make ends meet. Piece by piece, the truth came into focus, undeniable and damning. When it was my turn to testify, I stepped up to the stand with steady resolve. Looking directly at Greg, I recounted every detail of my tenure at the company, the successes, the sacrifices, and ultimately the betrayal. My voice wavered only once, when describing the humiliation of being escorted out like a criminal. But even then, I forced myself to keep going, to lay bare the pain and frustration I'd carried for so long. As the trial dragged on, public opinion shifted dramatically. Social media erupted with hashtags like #JusticeForAdrian and #CorporateAccountability, amplifying the voices of countless others who'd suffered similar fates. Journalists dissected every twist and turn, turning the case into a national spectacle. For better or worse, I became a symbol, a rallying cry for anyone who'd ever felt powerless against corporate giants. Despite the mounting pressure, Greg remained eerily composed, his poker face unbroken even as the evidence stacked against him. But cracks began to show within his legal team, whispered disagreements hinting at discord. Meanwhile, Marcus worked tirelessly, weaving facts and narratives into a compelling tapestry of injustice. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in court, I returned home to find a message waiting on my answering machine. It was from an old colleague, Rachel, who'd left Sterling and Company years earlier under mysterious circumstances. Her voice trembled as she recounted her own experience with Greg and his inner circle, confirming suspicions I'd harbored for months. She ended the call with a simple plea: "Whatever you do, don't give up." Her words reignited something deep within me, a spark of hope mixed with fierce determination. If nothing else, this fight had shown me the strength of solidarity, the power of shared experiences uniting strangers in pursuit of a common goal. And as daunting as the road ahead still seemed, I knew I wasn't walking it alone. With renewed vigor, I threw myself back into preparations, poring over documents and rehearsing arguments late into the night. Marcus, sensing my renewed energy, pushed harder too, leaving no stone unturned in our quest for accountability. Together we forged ahead, driven by the belief that sometimes, justice isn't just possible, it's inevitable. Yet even as momentum swung in our favor, doubts lingered at the edges of my mind. What if we lost? What if the system failed us, as it so often does? These questions haunted quiet moments, whispering fears I dared not voice aloud. But whenever they threatened to overwhelm me, I reminded myself why I started this journey in the first place, not for vengeance, but for validation. To prove that integrity matters, that fairness isn't obsolete, that individuals can stand up to institutions and win. And so, as the final days of the trial unfolded, I clung to that belief like a lifeline, steeling myself for whatever verdict fate might deliver. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain: I would emerge stronger, wiser, and unshakably committed to creating a world where no one else had to endure what I had. The courtroom was eerily silent as the jury filed back in after what felt like an eternity of deliberation. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it, but I forced myself to sit straight, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Marcus leaned over and whispered something encouraging, but his words barely registered. All I could focus on was the foreman standing up, holding that single piece of paper that would decide everything. "We find in favor of the plaintiff," he announced, his voice steady and clear. The room erupted into chaos, gasps from Greg's side, cheers from mine, reporters scrambling to capture the moment. But all I could do was stare at the foreman, waiting for the rest. Damages awarded, $4 million. $4 million. I exhaled sharply, a sound somewhere between laughter and disbelief escaping my lips. $4 million wasn't just a number, it was vindication, validation, proof that they couldn't silence me without consequence. It was more money than I'd ever dreamed of having, yet it wasn't the amount itself that made my chest swell with emotion. It was the weight of what it represented, justice served, loud and undeniable. Greg's face turned pale, his jaw tightening as his lawyers whispered urgently around him. Cheryl looked like she might cry, her trembling hands now visible even from across the room. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw fear in their eyes, the same kind of fear they had inflicted on me when they dismissed me so coldly. Karma, it seemed, had arrived fashionably late but with impeccable timing. In the days following the verdict, the whirlwind only intensified. Reporters camped outside my apartment building, shoving microphones toward me whenever I stepped foot outside. Social media exploded with memes and hashtags celebrating my victory. Strangers stopped me on the street to shake my hand or offer hugs, telling me how inspired they were by my story. Some sent letters filled with gratitude, others shared their own tales of corporate mistreatment, asking for advice or simply thanking me for giving them hope. But amidst the euphoria, there was also a strange emptiness. Winning the lawsuit didn't magically erase the months of sleepless nights, the sting of betrayal, or the lingering doubts about whether I'd done enough to deserve this outcome. At times, I caught myself wondering if I should feel guilty for taking such joy in their downfall. Wasn't revenge supposed to leave you hollow? Yet every time those thoughts crept in, I reminded myself of one thing: this wasn't about revenge. This was about balance. About tipping the scales back toward fairness, however imperfectly. Marcus called me into his office a week later, his usual calm demeanor replaced with uncharacteristic excitement. "Adrian," he said, sliding a folder across the desk, "there's something you need to see." Inside were documents detailing Sterling and Company's current financial state, or rather, its precarious position. Despite their outward appearance of success, years of mismanagement and reckless spending had left the company teetering on the brink of collapse. The lawsuit had been the final blow, sending shockwaves through their boardroom. Investors were pulling out, clients reconsidering contracts, and employees fleeing faster than rats abandoning a sinking ship. "They're desperate," Marcus explained, leaning forward. "And guess who holds all the cards now?" It took me a moment to process what he was saying. Then it clicked. With the settlement funds in my possession, and the leverage of public opinion firmly on my side, I had the power to dictate terms. Not just any terms, either. Terms that could reshape the very foundation of the company that had tried to destroy me. The idea came to me late one night, lying awake in bed staring at the ceiling. What if I didn't just settle for walking away victorious? What if I used this opportunity to change things, not just for myself, but for everyone who'd ever felt powerless against corporate greed? What if I bought them out? At first, the thought seemed absurd. Me, Adrian Vega, owning a multi-million-dollar marketing firm? The same firm that had fired me for budget cuts? It sounded like the plot of a movie, too far-fetched to be real. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If anyone understood the flaws in Sterling and Company's culture, it was me. And if anyone had the motivation to fix them, it was definitely me. I called Marcus the next morning, laying out my plan. To my surprise, he didn't laugh or dismiss it outright. Instead, he nodded slowly, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "You realize this won't be easy," he warned. "Buying them out means taking responsibility for everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly." "I know," I replied, surprising even myself with how steady my voice sounded. "But isn't that what leadership is about? Facing the mess head-on and doing what needs to be done." He smiled then, a rare flicker of admiration in his eyes. "All right, let's make history." Negotiations began almost immediately, though calling them negotiations felt like an understatement. Every meeting was tense, every conversation laced with thinly veiled hostility. Greg sat across from me during one particularly heated session, his face red with barely contained rage. "You think you can just waltz in here and take over?" he spat, slamming his fist on the table. "This company is my legacy." "Your legacy?" I shot back, leaning forward until our faces were inches apart. "No, Greg. Your legacy is a toxic workplace where people are treated like disposable assets. Where loyalty means nothing unless it serves your ego. That ends now." For once, he had no response. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air before he finally slumped back in his chair, defeated. By the end of the week, we reached an agreement. In exchange for a significant portion of the settlement funds, and a promise not to pursue further legal action, I would acquire controlling interest in Sterling and Company, effectively becoming its new owner. Walking into the office for the first time as CEO felt surreal. Employees greeted me cautiously, unsure what to expect from the woman who had once been escorted out under a cloud of shame. Some offered hesitant smiles, others avoided eye contact altogether. But as I stood in front of the entire staff during an impromptu town hall meeting, I laid out my vision for the future. Transparency, accountability, and respect would no longer be optional, they would be non-negotiable pillars of the company moving forward. "This isn't about revenge," I told them, looking directly at Greg, who sat stiffly in the back row. "It's about redemption, for all of us. Together, we can build something better. Something real." Applause broke out, tentative at first but growing louder as people realized I meant every word. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt truly alive. This wasn't just a victory, it was a beginning. Yet deep down, I knew challenges lay ahead. Rebuilding trust wouldn't happen overnight, and resistance would inevitably rear its ugly head. But I was ready. Ready to prove that change was possible, that integrity mattered, and that sometimes, the greatest victories come not from destroying your enemies, but from transforming them. As I walked out of the conference room that day, the weight of responsibility heavy on my shoulders, but my spirit lighter than it had been in ages, I allowed myself a small smile. The story wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait to see what happened next. Months turned into years, and under Adrienne's leadership, Sterling and Company transformed into a beacon of ethical business practices. Toxic policies were dismantled, employees flourished in an environment of trust and respect, and the company's reputation soared. Greg faded into obscurity, his name barely remembered except as a cautionary tale. One crisp autumn morning, Adrienne stood on the rooftop of the Sterling building, looking out over the city she'd once dreamed of conquering. She wasn't the same wide-eyed intern who had walked through these doors all those years ago. She was stronger, wiser, and unapologetically herself. As the sun rose, painting the skyline gold, she smiled. It wasn't just about winning anymore, it was about proving that integrity could thrive, even in the toughest places. And for Adrienne Vega, that was the most satisfying victory of all.